Okay, well, good morning, everyone. My name is Becky Kent, and I'm the chair of Halifax Water Board, and want to welcome you to today's meeting, January 27th, 2022. We would like to acknowledge this land on which Halifax Water operates and provides services is traditional land of the Mi'kmaq people. We make this acknowledgement to reaffirm our commitment to and responsibility to improving relationships and our own understanding of our local Indigenous peoples and citizens. Just remind everyone that this meeting is open to the public via the online platform, and the meeting is being recorded and will be posted to Halifax Water's YouTube channel as well. The agenda and materials for this meeting are also posted on Halifax Water's website. So we'll now proceed with today's agenda. I want to welcome everyone here. I want to take a moment just to welcome returning Commissioner Colleen Rawlings and new commissioners Mimi Kolomitsev, sorry, I hope I got that right, and Kostya Zakharov. So welcome to the team, and this is your first chance to be here in a public venue, and we wish you well, and we're here to support you. So let's move on with our first agenda item, which is the ratification of in-camera motions. We'll need someone to move and second that one.
I can move that.
Thank you, Commissioner Cole.
I move that Halifax Water Board ratify the in-camera motions.
Second, Commissioner Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you. Do we have any questions on that? If not, we'll call for the question. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The motion's carried. Thank you. Now we'll need to move to the thank you. Move to the order of business, which is 1B. This approval of order of business and approval of deletions and additions. We will, I'd like to move item number 6 in advance of item 4. So we'll move that one up. I think do we need a motion to do that? I think so. No? Okay, good. Any other additions or deletions or changes in the order of business? Seeing none, then we'll just make that adjustment. Thank you. Now we'll move on to approval of minutes.
Commissioner Kent, Madam Chair, I do see Commissioner Cuddle has her hand up.
Thank you. Commissioner Cuddle? You're muted, Patty.
Okay, today is not my day for technology. Oh, the gremlins. Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering about information, one of the information reports on the containment, cost containment initiatives. And I'm just wondering when and how to bring that forward for discussion.
I think we can, I guess we have a couple of options. To my knowledge, we could add it to today's agenda. We do have a heavy agenda. I'm not sure that we're going to get to all of them. And or you can put a request in to have it brought forward on at the next meeting.
Okay, the reason I was interested in it now is because we're talking about the capital budget, the operating budget increasing rates, and I think an important part of that discussion is also understanding kind of the cost containment. I don't know how much that's discussed in those other reports, but I did find that an interesting report and had some questions about it. So however the board wishes to proceed, I'm happy to accommodate that, but just wanted that noted.
Well, perhaps what we could do is add it to today's agenda at the end, or where it's appropriate, and then if we end up not being able to get to it, it would just transfer, it would just be carried forward. I think that's how that would work.
That would be fine with me.
And that way too, you'll have an opportunity to see if it actually is going to be covered off, and maybe some of this will be covered off and it won't be necessary. So perhaps let's do that. So we'll add, which number is that again?
That is item 5 in the information reports.
5.1. So where would that go in the agenda? Is there a particular place, Heidi, that we should insert that? Be right at the end.
It would be at the end. It could become item number 10.
Yeah, good enough. All right. All righty. Good, thank you. Any other changes? No. Okay, we will, someone want to put a motion on with an amended order of business?
I can do that, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Daigle Gammon.
Sure, I would move that the Halifax Water Board approve the order of business and approve the additional additions as amended today.
Thank you. Second?
Second, Commissioner Lovelace.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. And the motion's carried. Thank you. Moving now on to approval of the regular meeting held on Thursday, November 25th, 2021. Need a motion for that one?
I'm good to do that
Commissioner,
again if you like.
Thank-
Commissioner Rawlings, I can move that the Halifax Water Board approve the minutes of November 25th, 2021 regular meeting.
Thank you. And Commissioner Gammon, you second that one? I'll take that one.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed, nay?
Aye.
Okay, motion's carried. Okay. Number 3, business arising from the minutes. So we have a nomination of committee representatives and just a verbal update, and then we'll be looking for a motion.
So, Madam Chair, I've just placed the motion in the chat function. This is based on the discussions that were held in camera this morning, so it really is a confirmation of the motion that was carried this morning.
Okay, good. Thank you. Anyone interested in moving that? Someone?
Certainly. Yeah, okay, sure. I move that Halifax Water approve the appointment of the following commissioners to Halifax Water Board subcommittees. The executive, Becky Kent as chair, Colleen Rollings, Kostya Zaharov. The Audit and Finance Committee, Colleen Rollings as chair, Pam Lovelace, Mimi Kolomistev. The Environment, Health and Safety Committee, Patty Cuddle chair, Kathy Daigle Gammon, Kostya Zaharov. Enterprise Risk Management, Becky Kent, Colleen Rollings, Patty Cuddle. I hope I got that right, Madam Chair.
I think you did. I think the one addition would be calling Enterprise Risk Management is chaired by Colleen Rollings. Correct?
So that has to be determined by the committee.
Okay, no.
Yet gone down that road yet because we didn't have a complete committee for a period of time. So that can be discussed at the next Enterprise Risk Management Committee.
Okay, good. Thank you. Do we have a seconder for that motion?
Second?
Thank you. Commissioner Daigle Gammon seconds that. Any further comments or questions? Seeing none. All in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed?
Aye.
Motion carried. Thank you. So now we're going to go directly to item number 6, the proposed 2022-23 business plan. We have, perhaps, I guess, is that going to be Louis presenting that?
That's actually going to be me, and then Louis will be presenting the operating budget, and Reid will be later presenting the capital budget, which are the two pieces that will reflect how we pay for and finance the strategic initiatives that we want to accomplish this year. So I think Jake is going to run the presentation for us. You want to pull up the slides, Jake? And in your board package, you do have the draft business plan. And if you move to the first slide, you'll see that the background indicates that the first step in us developing the business plan this year was a strategic planning workshop that we conducted with the board on December 9th. And the next step in the process is that the annual business plan, after it's approved today, moves forward to Halifax Council. Right now, that's tentatively scheduled for February the 8th. And the proposed operating and capital budgets that we've developed for 22 and 23 reflect both the annual business plan, the current 5-year business plan, which was approved by the Halifax Water Board, and a lot of our long-range plans, in particular the Integrated Resource Plan, which is a 30-year plan approved by the Halifax Water Board and the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board, which addresses what Halifax Water's long-term needs are caused by growth, environmental compliance, and just the need to maintain our existing assets, which we refer to as asset renewal. Next slide, Jake. And for our newer board members, I thought it would be helpful just to show a refresher on the business planning cycle. So starting from the top of the circle, that's where we're at. January, we typically get the business plan, the operating and capital budgets approved by the board. We do share the information with Halifax Council in February. In March, we'll come back to the Halifax Water Board proposing the corporate balance scorecard targets for the next fiscal year. And the corporate balance scorecard targets are how we measure performance. So both our operational performance and performance against what we call organizational indicators for critical success factors. And those are the big things we need to move forward to keep our strategic objectives moving and in line. Then in June of the year, we come back with the results from the prior year, financial results, the corporate balance scorecard results, and the achievement of our strategic objectives. And then in July, we have an annual general meeting, and we also present a report called the Accountability Report to Halifax Regional Council. Halifax Council has something called an administrative order for Halifax Water that requires us to report on our achievement of our strategic objectives and our operational performance. And then finally, we start the process again next fall. We'll be reporting to the URB on the results from the previous year, but then we'll start working on planning for the coming fiscal year, and we will be back to the board to do strategic planning to work on the next annual budget. Next slide, Jake. So the theme, if you read the business plan, is really one about taking a step back this year and trying to build some capacity. Right now, Halifax Water is constrained by limited financial and human resources, and our plan for 22-23 reflects that we need to maintain service and meet regulatory obligations. And what we do is highly prescripted and regulated, so we don't have a lot of discretionary, choices about what we can and can't do. We also need to start addressing some capacity gaps that are hindering our ability to proceed with different initiatives, and that's mainly human resourcing capacity gaps. We also need to keep the most important and strategic initiatives moving forward. Even though we're operating at a deficit and we're operating short-staffed, we do need to keep driving forward step by step to try to move some of our most important initiatives along. Promoting a safety-first culture is one of those important initiatives that can't be left by the wayside, and maintaining team morale and guarding against burnout. And that is probably a risk more so now than it ever has been before. The Omicron wave of the pandemic has certainly had an impact, more of an impact on most businesses with this wave than any of the previous waves. Next slide, Jake. So part of the solution, we've been trying to maximize the use of our existing resources and getting better at working collaboratively in teams, using capacity where it exists and not working in silos. We did a reorganization this year of the org structure to establish one operations department, and we're starting to, standardize some processes and find efficiencies. And the work on culture will continue. Also in 22-23, we're going to try to get our employees focused on what is really important. One of the consistent things that have come back for the last few years in our employee survey is employees aren't really sure on what the strategic objectives are, or they don't have a clear line of sight to what's most important. So for that reason, one of the things we've done this year is try to simplify the business plan. We've reformatted it, organized it by 4 common pillars rather than by business units, because that's also a way of emphasizing that we need to be working across business units to achieve these common objectives. Next slide. So we have fewer strategic objectives than in previous year, but there are still a lot of strategic objectives. They're organized under these 4 pillars: people, health, safety, and environment, financial and regulatory accountability, and operational excellence. And these 4 pillars were presented to the Halifax Water Board at the strategic planning workshop and were accepted. Next slide. So from a people perspective, we're going to be continuing to work on enhancing our workforce planning. And I will say that in the interest of time, I'm not going to go in great detail on each of these items. Within the new business plan format, under each of these strategic objectives, you'll see a section listing the strategic objective. You'll see the rationale for why we are doing it. And then you'll see a section on the impact. One of the things you'll notice is, compared to previous year's business plans, there is a lot more discussion of risk around each of these strategic objectives. So whether one of these elements is helping us address an existing risk or mitigate a risk. And we also talk about the risks that will hinder us from achieving these strategic objectives. So reflecting risk in the business plan this year is just another step or more evidence that we're really starting to mature our enterprise risk management. And the next step in that will actually be incorporating more information on enterprise risk management within our Halifax Water Board reports starting in April. So back to the people objectives. Onboarding those new hires we need to get, making sure they're properly oriented and supported to the organization is very important. There's currently what's being referred to as a war on talent. It's very hard from a recruitment perspective to get people now, particularly in certain trades, certain professions. So attraction and retention and maintaining positive employee morale are very important. Building positive and diverse workplace culture is always on our strategic objectives. And right now we're carrying out what I would say is year 1 of a formalized diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. The framework for that was presented to the Halifax Water Board last June. There'll be actually some information coming to the Halifax Water Board at the March board meeting in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion update and a framework for what we're going to be doing over the next 3 years on that front. We also are continuing to work on increasing stakeholder and customer engagement. We're trying to support the Halifax Water Board through development of new members, ensuring our major initiatives have communication and stakeholder engagement plans, and we're working on enhancing information available to our customers through the Customer Connect portal, and also through our initiative later this year to redesign the face of our Halifax Water bill. Next slide addresses the health, safety, and environment pillar. So under this pillar, we've identified the continued need to enhance safety and security culture. One of the initiatives under that is doing safety leadership training for all of our managers and supervisors this year. Another significant project is gaining approval for a new biosolids strategy and executing a contract for the new biosolids processing facility. This has been in strategic initiatives for the last 2 or 3 years, different components of it. It's a multi-year project. So the next step will be us actually getting to contract execution for construction of a new biosolids processing facility. Developing a climate action plan is also a carryover. It's a multi-year initiative that has started this year. And what we've done this year is we set up a climate resiliency committee. We have actually in the process of engaging a consultant to work with us on this. And there's a lot of different climate adaptation and mitigation initiatives going on at Halifax Water right now. And this will be bringing an overarching plan to ensure they're all coordinated and in alignment with Halifax 2050. Also, we're aligning green initiatives for fleet and buildings with the climate action plan. Maintaining regulatory compliance and enhancing our regulatory reporting, that's going to be an ongoing strategic objective. Probably every year you'll see some actions under that one. We're also launching a new service compliance program. That's a program that we had presented to the Environment, Health, Safety Committee of the Halifax Water Board this year. We need to do more work on that program and some stakeholder engagement, and are hoping to finalize it in the 22-23 fiscal year, get it approved and get it initiated. Finally, we're well underway with implementation of a corporate environmental management system. The next pillar is financial regulatory accountability. So the objectives under financial and regulatory accountability, the first one is improving the financial position and updating the long-range financial plan. You'll hear from Louis later on about how we've been operating with a deficit for the past 2 years. And we'll be talking a little bit later about seeking approval for a framework to guide us in development of an application to submit to the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board. So Halifax Water has been very fortunate. We haven't had to increase rates for a number of years. We have had cost containment programs in place that have helped us address how we continued to operate, although we were not increasing rates. That was just one of the factors. The other thing that cost containment has helped us do is absorb the impact that decreasing consumption has had on the utility over the last 20 years. The next objective under financial and regulatory accountability is optimizing capital project planning and delivery. And Reid will be talking a little bit about capital when he does his presentation or his update on capital. But one of the things we've been highlighting for the last few months is that we are not appropriately resourced for the level of capital spend that is now required under the Integrated Resource Plan. We're continuing to progress asset management and infrastructure planning initiatives. We also have an objective to complete and implement an actuarial evaluation of the Halifax Water Employees Pension Plan, and the board received a report on that in November. There's another one in your package today. The actuarial evaluation has actually started, but it will be finalized in the 22-23 fiscal year, and then we need to implement the results from that valuation. We also have an objective to complete a cost of service update and a rate application process. We'll be completing water safety assessment reports and a water safety plan. These are both regulatory requirements that we need to achieve. And finally, we'll be securing regulatory approvals for a number of significant projects that are listed on this slide in the red font. These are all big processes with the Halifax Water Board and with the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board. Next slide. Under the operational excellence pillar, we'll be implementing expanded stormwater service in June 2022, subject to approval by the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board. We also will be developing an operating plan for the new Burnside Operations Depot. So as the board has been told at previous board meetings, we are consolidating 4 existing operating depots into one new operating depot in Burnside. And whenever you bring 4 cultures together, and well, 5 different cultures technically, because there's another group joining in this building, it requires a significant amount of planning in terms of how you successfully integrate those different employee groups, establish a positive culture in the new building, and also how we're going to operate the new building, the nuts and bolts of how it's going to be a productive building and how we're going to be efficient in providing our service from there. We'll also be working on year 2 of the water supply enhancement program, optimizing our water supply plant and wastewater treatment facility processes through the ongoing Dalhousie Research Partnership. We have a strategic objective to incorporate the digital water strategy in the 5-year IT strategic plan. We have an objective to implement corporate enterprise risk management and improve cybersecurity maturity. And we have a project that's multi-year and is currently underway to implement a new enterprise resource planning system. And the goal with that is to improve operational efficiency. And there were also some operational and financial savings as a result of that project. So rather than upgrading our existing SAP ERP system, we're replacing it with a different type of system. And finally, the last strategic objective is just maintaining a high level of day-to-day service that our customers have come to expect. So on any given day, we've got a lot of employees who are processing development permits, processing, for instance, accounts payable, dealing with customer calls. We have performance metrics, that guide the service we want to provide, and we need to continually focus on just making sure that bread and butter activity that keeps the utility going is done to a high standard. Next slide. So those are the strategic objectives. If the business plan is approved by the board, this slide just lays out what I'd presented in the graphic at the beginning. The steps of approval and the steps that ensure that we are accountable to work on delivering this plan and report back to the Halifax Water Board. Next slide. And this is just the one-page graphic, the plan on the page. If the business plan is approved by the board, we will be doing a distribution of the strategic objectives to all of the Halifax Water employees. I'll be going out and visiting different depots and treatment plants to talk about, what's in the business plan for next year and what's been approved as the strategic objectives. We'll also be doing some virtual meetings, and every employee will receive a copy of this document. Next. I think this is it. Questions?
Okay. Don't see any questions in chat. I'm hoping I haven't missed anything. I think I see you're trying. Yeah, there you go, Kathy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Kathy, for the presentation. I'm always really impressed when you read this big report on the business plan and then you see the PowerPoint and it gets synthesized so well. It's really good. Thank you. One of the questions I have is around one of the systems, the SAP system, instead of upgrading it and going to a new one. And this may connect, I'm not sure. But does that then mean that all of the metering system, what does it do to the metering system for customers? I've had a couple of conversations just recently, some people being very concerned and want an analog meter as opposed to a smart meter. And so in that change of technology, does that have an implication for the meters that are used and how they're read?
So I'll take a shot at that, and then Louis can jump in if he wants to. But the change out of the ERP system from SAP to a system called Kayenta does not impact the metering system, although it is the repository for where the meter readings eventually go and where the bills get issued from. With the question of whether a customer can have an analog meter or not, if we have customers who are opposed to RF technology, there is a mechanism that they can have a manual meter that we have to manually read, and there is a manual meter read fee to do that, but there is an option there. And right now, 98.5% of our customers do have RF meters. We completed a meter change out project about 3 years ago.
Right. Thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Cuddle?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Kathy and team, for this report and overview of the proposed 22-23 business plan. As Commissioner Daigle Gammon was saying, it's nice when everything is kind of pulled together into a concise report. You know, when I was reading this, you know, I think as a water commissioner, there's a lot in here to be excited about. One is the strategic pillars, the focus on continuous improvement. I like in the report how you've talked about how Halifax Water is adapting, is creating a climate change plan and looking at, you know, protecting the infrastructure and changes to infrastructure and to efficiency. I think that's really important. That's actually a question that came up at Halifax Council this past week. And so your comments about aligning the work with Halifax Water with the Halifax plan is, I think, something people are looking for about how, as a municipality as a whole, our different kind of departments and pieces of the administration working together to meet common goals. And I look forward to hearing more about that, which I will as the new chair of the Health, Environment and Health and Safety Committee. Very excited about that. But one of the things I'm always looking for is, like, you know, when I read this, I think from a customer perspective, you know, like how will things be better for them? Right. So even like when we look at the technology of switching over to the smart meters, you know, there's some customers that don't really see, like, well, how does that, you know, I'm paying more for what? You know, my rates are going up, I'm paying more, but how are things getting better for me as the customer? And I know a lot of this has to do of looking at things from a big picture, you know, looking at this as managing a city that's growing rapidly, and needing to make major investments and in infrastructure and staffing to ensure that we maintain a quality water system. But you know, at the end of the day, it's you know, what's the customer? What can the customer be looking for in this?
That's a great question, and probably one that we could highlight more. So some of the things that are reflected in our current operating expenses, which aren't reflected in our current rates, but will be in new rates when we do our rate adjustments, are some new programs and services. So some examples off the top of my head would be the lead service line replacement program. We have a private lateral replacement program. We've enhanced our customer assistance program since the last time we adjusted rates. We implemented the $25 million, you know, new metering system with the Customer Connect portal, and customers now have the ability to manage and monitor their consumption themselves, more options to make.
Lost
Their
Kathy.
portion of their budget.
We lost you just for that last sentence, I think.
Oh, okay. So I was saying that, and you know, we've invested $25 million in the new metering system in the Customer Connect portal, and portals customers now have the ability to have an account in Customer Connect, maintain their own information around bills, monitor the consumption, receive notifications about leaks, and also get customized water saving tips. So we have really enhanced a lot of our customer facing programs since the last time we adjusted rates. The other thing we're doing more of and doing differently, I would say, is communications and stakeholder engagement, and there'll be continued growth in that. One of our new FTEs for next year is actually a new communications associate to work in Jeff Myrick's department.
Oh, you're still muted.
Thank you, Kathy. And you know, I think in the reporting and presentation of the information, I know a lot of what you're saying is in there when you kind of dig through it, but really, like, you know, helping to communicate to Halifax Water customers those things is important. And I just a quick question about the efficiency piece, right? Because while we have the smart meters, and we're going to get into the finances in a minute, you know, the utility relies on revenues. And so when I think about like the early stages of the Efficiency Nova Scotia program, right, where we gave the power utility the responsibility of trying of looking at efficiency for customers, which was really lessening their revenues. And so that's why Efficiency Nova Scotia got pulled out of Nova Scotia Power. So as a water utility, when we look at this in the public interest and how we support and encourage and educate people to lessen their water use, to lessen their bills, well, is there a conflict there within the water utility in our revenue side of things? And how is that program being delivered, and what are we investing in that kind of work and communication, so that as we see, this on one hand, we need to increase rates because we need to increase revenue, at the same time, encouraging people to use less water to lessen their water bills.
So there's two pieces to that I think are really important to cover. One is the question about, is there a conflict? I think for Halifax Water, it's different than a power utility because we are a water, wastewater, and stormwater utility. And although water consumption decreasing does cause decreased revenues on the water side, it's actually beneficial on the wastewater side. And we have cost savings if we have less water going out through the homes. So the same perception of conflict doesn't exist in the same way, I would say, for us. The second important piece is that over the last 20 years, and we have meter readings that support this, and we can show you some great graphs, water consumption has decreased by 25% over the last 20 years. And Halifax Water hasn't been adjusting rates every year. We've been able to absorb the impact of a lot of the decrease in consumption by the fact that we have a lot of things on the go, like our cost containment initiatives. So our overall mission is to be good stewards of the environment, and Halifax Water has always had water conservation tips on its website, even before we had the portal. There was a point in time where Halifax Water was actually making water conservation devices like low flow fixtures for taps available through the customer care center at Halifax Water. That was before they became, very commonly available and cheaply available through any Kent, Home Depot, or Home Hardware. So Halifax Water has been promoting that conservation and this issue when it's come up with the Nova Scotia Utility Review Board from time to time. An intervener would say, well, shouldn't water conservation or efficiency be moved over to an organization like Efficiency Nova Scotia? It has never been viewed the same way as the conflict between the power utility with respect to decreasing revenues and the objective to decrease electrical consumption. We do, however, have a piece of work to do under our integrated resource plan projects related to demand side management. So although you'll see in the operating budget this year, after 20 years of decreasing consumption, for the first time ever, we're projecting a 1% increase in consumption in next year's budget. That's not a factor, being driven by the fact that we're doing anything differently that doesn't promote conservation. It's driven by the fact that for the first time in many, many years, the growth we're seeing within the municipality is enough to offset the natural decreases in consumption that occur as customers manage their bill and get increasingly more water efficient devices.
That's great. Thank you, Kathy. I really appreciate this conversation.
Sorry, I was muted. Any further questions or speakers? Seeing none, I'm just going to offer a comment here. I just want to say how much I appreciate the work and effort that has gone into this plan, and I really appreciate the plan on a page. I think that's an incredibly great tool, not only for the staff and the employees of the commission, but as us as commissioners. It's a great reference without having to dive too deep into the detail. And I know we have great resources to reach out should we have questions and such, but just wanted to note that. So I'm not seeing any other further questions. Perhaps we can have a motion now on the floor.
I'm happy to put that on the floor.
Commissioner Cuddle?
Oh, wait a second. Is it on the screen here? No.
No, it's on the agenda, if you can pull that up.
It is on the screen.
It's on the screen.
Oh, there it is. There it is.
Oh,
Yeah.
number 6. There it is. Sorry, number 7. Oh, yes. Okay. I move that the Halifax Water Board approve the 2022-23 business plan in the substantial form attached and direct the general manager to submit the annual business plan to Halifax Council.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. Second by Commissioner Daigle Gammon. And no further questions. All in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. And the motion is carried. Thank you all. So now we'll revert back in the agenda to 4.2, the proposed 2022-23 capital budget. And we'll go to Louis.
Capital budget's me, Madam Chair. So it's Reed.
Oh, sorry, Reed. Got those back on my notes, my cheat notes.
No problem. Shall I proceed with that?
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, Commissioners. So we're presenting the 2022-23 proposed capital budget at the amount of $106,485,000. In your package, you have a written report. You have a copy of this PowerPoint presentation, and you also have a line-by-line copy of the detailed capital budget. What I'm going to do is just present a bit of a high-level overview and give you a little explanation of how the capital budget comes together. So where we start in our capital budgeting process is with our integrated resource plan. That's a document that we prepare every 5 years or so under the auspices of the Utility and Review Board. So we look at our asset condition in that, we look at the regulatory environment, we look at the projected growth for the municipality, and we determine what we are required to do to maintain sustainable assets over the next 30 years. And that integrated resource spend over 30 years totals about $4 billion. And there's 3 primary drivers of investment in assets, which are asset renewal, compliance, and growth. Next slide, please, Jake. So the first one is asset renewal. And just like when we all own a home and we have to replace a furnace or a roof periodically, we need to maintain our assets. And you probably understand that we've got thousands of kilometers of water, wastewater, stormwater pipe. We have thousands of valves, manholes, fire hydrants, and we have 180 sewage pumping stations, 15 water storage reservoirs, 12 wastewater plants, and 8 water supply plants. And to be as sustainable as possible, we need to make the right maintenance or replacement intervention on each of those assets, not too early, not too late, and do it in a cost-effective way. So the way we manage that is we have asset management teams. The assets are grouped into 7 classes, and there's a team of operations and engineering staff who look at those assets and develop the long-term plans for renewing and maintaining them. And for linear assets, we look at things like water main breaks, the video condition of the inside sewers. And for vertical assets like water storage tanks, as an example, and dams, there's a periodic cycle where we do an engineering investigation of the condition of those assets. Next slide, please. Regulatory compliance is another driver in the capital budget. So what we're doing is looking at the regulatory landscape over the next few years, and we're asking ourselves, what do we need to do to get in compliance where we're not in terms of asset capability, and also what do we need to do to maintain compliance. Next slide, please. And the final driver is growth. And as part of the infrastructure master plan, we look at the regional plan that's developed by the municipality, and we do engineering analysis to determine what asset improvements or capacity increases or new assets are needed so that we can supply water, wastewater, and stormwater services to the various areas when the growth comes. And then we have a regional development charge that's paid for by people who, developers and builders who are causing the growth that finances a good majority of those growth-related assets. Next slide, please. So just as an example, this is how the $4 billion splits down between asset renewal, growth, and compliance. Almost 3/4 of that, well, 2/3 is asset renewal. That's not unusual for a city of the age of Halifax, and I think we're all aware of the growth pressures in the city. So as we get into the municipality doing its next regional plan and us doing our next IRP a few years down the road, it'll be interesting to see what the growth part looks like. Next slide, please, Jake. And this is a breakdown by water, wastewater, and stormwater, our three services. This is also very typical, just historically right across North America. Water assets have had more attention than wastewater assets, so there tends to be a backlog on wastewater. Stormwater is relatively smaller because unlike the other two services, we don't have treatment plants, so we're not. Stormwater tends to be dealt with locally, and we don't have big pipes transmitting stormwater across the municipality like we do with the other services. Next slide, please. And this is just an overview of our 30-year spend in the infrastructure master plan. That $4 billion average is about $130 million per year. There's some spikiness to it. We work on a 5-year basis to try to smooth that spikiness. And we don't necessarily do an asset intervention or build a new asset in the year it says. So we're managing things. In some cases, maybe there's more capacity in the system and we don't need a growth-related asset exactly when we said it did, or maybe the growth comes earlier or later. And we intervene on the assets at the time when they need to be replaced or need to be renewed, not necessarily on a date that the IRP projects a few years down the road. But it does give us a good overview of how we finance that over 30 years. Next slide, please. So each year we do develop a formal 1-year capital budget that you have before us. And then just for sort of reference purposes and looking out a bit, we have a 5-year capital budget. And it is, it is the suite of projects that we need to maintain our services as dictated by the IRP. And so just for information, a capital project is defined as something that's new or newly constructed. It has to have a value of $5,000 and a life expectancy beyond 1 year. So it doesn't include consumable things. And there's a process that starts, well, it really goes on throughout the year, but it starts in earnest in September, largely led by engineering staff, but it involves staff right across the utility. I would like to mention that this year we scaled back the size of our capital budget. We looked at some planning. We looked at things that maybe required some more time for land, some things that might be discretionary. And the reason we did that goes back to what Kathy said about resourcing. And for the engineering department, this is a year to not only bring on more human resources, but to bring on better systems and governance structures to manage the increasing volume and the increasingly complex projects. So $106,485,000, it's less than last year's budget of around $125 million. It's less than the IRP average of $130 million. And it's less than the $150 million that last year's 5-year capital budget projected it would be for this year. So this year, the 106 is a level that we believe that we can deliver with, with bringing on some staff throughout the year. Next slide, please. So the process is staff puts together in the fall. It was reviewed and approved by the Audit and Finance Committee in December. Now we're asking you to review it today, and if it's approved, we will be sending it in a few weeks to the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board with approval coming typically in about May. Next slide, please. And because we have 3 rate classes of water and 3 services, water, wastewater, and stormwater, we have 3 distinct capital budgets, water, wastewater, and stormwater. And then as well, we have corporate projects which go which provide services, things like fleet, IT, buildings, that are funded through the 3 capital budgets. Next slide, please. And this is a breakdown of the 106 million in this year's capital budget between water, wastewater, and stormwater. Next slide, please. So the water budget for this year is $52 million, just listing a few key projects. The Churchill Corridor Transmission Main, this is part of something that's been going on for several years. Our original Halifax transmission mains to Chain Lake are still in service. They date back to the 1850s. We've been renewing it, and we're going from the Rotary area up to about Churchill Drive and Quinpool in stages. And this year we've got a project plan for about $9.4 million. We invest about $5 million this year in just bread and butter water main renewals. Kathy mentioned the lead service line replacement program. That's about $2 million. We've got some significant work on our water supply enhancement program this year. That's a program of $230 million over about the next 10 years to upgrade water supply plants. In a few minutes, we'll be talking about our Akerley Reservoir project, and we have obligations under the Cogswell project to upgrade and relocate some of our infrastructure. Next slide, Jake. And this is just a breakdown of that same water budget amount amongst our various asset classes in water. Next slide, please. Similarly, for wastewater, we have a trenchless rehabilitation program where we install structural linings in degrading sewer pipes. That is about $2.4 million this year. We're going to do about $1.4 million of what we call integrated projects, where we take advantage of coordination with the city on street upgrade projects to improve degrading sewers. Bissett Road is what's up next in our program to improve our wastewater pumping stations. We also invest heavily in renewing individual wastewater laterals as they degrade. I mentioned the South Park Street area sewer separation program. It's in a busy area of the city. We don't have too much in this year's capital budget, but that's going to take place over about the next 5 years to separate combined sewers and create capacity for growth in that area. And the first phase will go this year. We have done significant improvements in the Dartmouth wastewater plant, increasing some of the process components, the fine screens and the lamellas, and it was so successful, we're going to carry on. That's underway actually, but it will continue into this year in the Halifax and Herring Cove plants at about $5 million. And similarly, we have work to do at the Cogswell interchange. Next slide, please, Jake. And here is the similar breakdown for the wastewater assets. Next slide, please. And for stormwater, we have integrated projects again. We have a pretty expansive driveway and cross culvert renewal program, and we're also doing some work at Cogswell on stormwater. Next slide, please. And that's the breakdown for that. Next slide, please. And in the corporate projects, these are just some of the significant ones. We're in year 5 of our current 5-year IT strategic plan. The big items in it are at about $6 million are the integrated resource plan that Kathy spoke with. That's the integrated resource system to replace SAP, and also our cybersecurity initiatives. So, we have a corporate flow monitoring program, which is part of asset management at about $1.2 million. And our Burnside Operations Center should get into construction this year. That's a total of $40 million, but we're planning to spend about $9 million in this current budget year. And every year we have fleet upgrades included. Next slide. So this is just a snapshot of the summary in the detailed budget that you have. Feel free to look through it and ask any questions. And next slide. And these are the funding sources. We get funding from depreciation and debt, and I'll ask Louis to answer any questions you might have on that. Regional development charge is funding that we collect from builders and developers for growth-related assets. External funding includes things where we're partners with HRM on projects or infrastructure programs from higher level of government. And the capital cost contribution, that's also developer collected growth-related funding, but it's more on a neighborhood or individual community level. And so that's the end of the presentation. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Reid. I appreciate that. That's great. Lots of great detail there. I do apologize. I appear to have missed 4.1, so we'll be going back to that one. That's where my Louis note was, and then I just read off the wrong one. So do we have any questions from commissioners? I see Commissioner Dago-Gammon, I think, is nodding her head. I'll start there and then follow up with, I think, Mimi. And anyone else would like to, let me know.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Reid. Two sort of quick questions. One is on the wastewater, the water supply enhancement program. Is that where some of those, I know you and I had a conversation about on the Waverley Road, but is that where small pumping stations would they fall under that enhancement program?
With the water supply enhancement program is upgrades to our two large treatment plants at Pockwalk and Lake Major. And that's dealing with the changing source water that we've reported to you about. And also, you know, Lake Major is 23 years old. Pockwalk is about getting near 50 years old or 45 years old. So that's just planned upgrades.
All right. And then my second quick question is on the funding source, when you look at debts at the 65 million, like from a percentage point of view, how is that? How does that relate to our risk? So does that mean that we're taking that on as debts?
I think that's a good one for Louis to answer if he doesn't mind.
Okay, I'm just wondering about the percentage debt ratio. Where is the safe zone, and where is that number in comparison to a safe zone?
So currently we strive for a debt to equity ratio of 40%, 60%. The municipality guarantees our debt over a 35% debt equity ratio, or sorry, a debt servicing charge or cost. So we have a blanket guarantee from the municipality in our debt of if it's over 35% or up to 35%. So we manage debt primarily based on our cash flow. To the extent that we have cash resources, we might delay the speed that we bring debt on, but as required, we'll be bringing that on. So in the operating budget, you'll see that we're looking to bring in only about $15.5 million in debt in the current year. So long-term capital, we would need to finance this capital by the debt numbers that Reid's presented. But on a year-by-year basis, we adjust that based on the projects that are brought in service and the projects and the amount of cash that we have in the bank at any particular point in time. I don't know if I helped.
It did, but so I guess from a financial point of view, there's a comfort level with where this debt is at.
Yeah. So traditionally, utilities would have a much higher debt equity ratio than we do. So we have a fairly low level of debt relative to our revenues at this point.
Thank you. That's the words I wanted. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mimi, Commissioner Kolomitsa. Kolomitsa, that's it.
With the rapid growth we're experiencing in HRM recently, I was wondering if the regional development charge has continued to meet the needs of Halifax Water in terms of infrastructure overall and the costs associated with that.
Yeah, I would say it is. In fact, we have the opposite problem of bringing projects forward, and that's part of the capital project delivery that we need to work on this year. So it's bringing in all the revenue that's intended for those projects. There's plus and minuses. Sometimes projects are more expensive, others are less expensive. I think what's interesting as well, I know the commissioners are concerned about growth. So, I think when we do another integrated resource plan, we may see the sort of truly regional assets like water, wastewater plants require more funding if growth's going to drive earlier improvements. But then there's other places with trunk sewers, storm sewer separation, for instance, where it's providing growth capacity in this neighborhood and then the next neighborhood over there. And I think we'll be fine in those. It's just that the capacity needs to come to those neighborhoods earlier.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Zakharov.
Sorry, I'm having some video delay issues. I'm not sure if it's only on my side or.
You're showing
Reid,
just a delayed, but we can hear you.
okay, perfect. Thank you. And sorry for the technical challenges. Reid, quick question to you on the capital budget. I know that we had separate discussions with Kathy previously. I just wanted to get your point of view on the increased budget comparing to the previous year on the capital spend, because capital spend projected for this year is almost 50% higher than the previous year. So I know that, as you mentioned, that you're scaling back, and this is, I appreciate that that you take into account some challenges, but the new resources that you're planning to add this year and other great, big projects that are planned for this year, would you be comfortable on delivering those for this year? Basically, the question.
Yeah, I believe that, as I said, that it's going to take a while to bring on new resources, and it's not just human resources. It's, we're bringing on a capital project management information system. We're going to put in some more governance to how projects proceed through their life cycle. And those things will take time to get up to full maturity. And I should say, and we're going to talk in another agenda item about the amount of capital we spend, the amount we've delivered each year has been relatively low, but we are delivering, if you look back over the last 10 years, we're delivering 50 to 90 million, depending on the year. Typically, it's about $70 million. That's with the resources we have at the moment. So we're confident. We've also looked at a couple things. So for instance, the water supply enhancement program last year was year one. That got off to a little bit of a slow start. We're managing that through program development with our consultant. We've sat down with them and we've talked about how we can make this go faster, changing the governance, changing our responsibilities versus the consultants. So we're going to have a few improvements that way. And yeah, so the idea is that we will, the 106 million is achievable.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Commissioner Cuttle?
Actually, sorry, I'm okay right now. I think my question got answered about the debt ratio earlier. Thank you.
Is there anyone further? No, seeing none. That's great. Thank you for all of that presentation and work. We appreciate it. Perhaps
You're welcome.
a motion on that one. The motion's on the chat. 4.2.
If you would like me to do that, Madam Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Daigle-Gammon.
So I move that the Halifax Water Board approve the proposed 2022-23 capital budget at a total value of $106,485,000 as detailed in the attached Schedule 1.
Thank you. Seconder?
I can second that.
Commissioner Cuttle seconds that. No further questions. All in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. And the motion is carried. Thank you. Now we'll go back to 4.1.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Just thought I would jump in here. I'm mindful of the time and also mindful of the other matters on the agenda that require a motion. And so a suggestion I would like to make for your consideration is that item 4.1 and 5.1, although we had prepared a presentation for those items, perhaps we could not do the presentation. The materials were provided, and so if there's any questions, of course, we have staff here that could answer any questions that might arise, but it might allow and save some time if we skip the presentations on those and move to simply present the items where there's a motion.
Thank you. I'm certainly open to that because we will be opening up some opportunity during the debate on that. So yeah, I'm good with that. Could we just have a set? Is there anyone that would be opposed to that? You could identify with raising a hand. Otherwise, we'll take that as a confirmation that we should do that. Okay. Well, then let's now move to 4.3. Thank you for that, Heidi. 4.3 proposed 2022-23 operating budget. Now this one I'm guessing is for you, Louis, and I've tried twice other times to give you more work than was necessary. So third time's a charm.
Yes, it'll be me. And Jake, if you can just skip to the next slide. So this is just simply the motion that's before you in the report. So Jake, you can go to the next slide. So we have presented versions of the operating budget a couple of times now to the board, to the Audit and Finance Committee. So I'll stick to some of the changes that have happened since we last presented. Kathy stole a little bit of my thunder. We've increased our consumption estimate for the 22-23 budget by approximately 1%. What that does is increase our revenue by about $1.2 million. About 400,000 of that is water, and about 800,000 that is in the wastewater side. So we also talked about the number of new customers, so that hasn't changed. The rest on the slide is essentially just the last time we increased rates, more for your reference than anything else. So Jake, you can go to the next slide. So on the stormwater side, we have added approximately $500,000 in revenue related to the expansion. That of course is subject to the UARB approving the expansion, but right now that's the working numbers that we've included in the budget. So 300,000 specifically to customers, so the site-related flow charges, and approximately $200,000 on the right-of-way charge. I want to move to the next slide. So on the expense side, we have presented the revenue assumptions based on our review of the CPI and the changes that are required around the non-union side. We did increase that estimate from 2.5 originally to 3%. So we have a 0.5% increase built into that 3, which is designed to capture people moving through through their salary bands. So that's the only change that we've made to the expense assumptions. You want to go to the next slide? We also have to provide a bit of additional information on our new FTEs. So Reed and Kathy have both referenced that we're adding new FTEs to increase the capacity within the organization. In total, it's approximately 21 FTEs. So those are positions that are brought in at different points in time through the fiscal year. The rest of the information that's there is essentially what we presented before. I did want to flag the dividend grant in lieu, which is paid to the municipality. Just for reference, in the 18-19 fiscal year, that payment was about $5 million. In the 22-23 fiscal year, that payment is now at $6.8 million. You want to go to the next slide, please? So this is where we've ended up. So this is the operating budget for all services, so water, wastewater, and stormwater combined. Our revenues have increased primarily related to the 1% increase in consumption by $2.3 million. Operating expenditures have increased by about $3.4 million. And then an offset, the financial and other revenues have stayed relatively flat. Financial and other expenditures primarily related to the delay of issuing debt as a result of our capital not being spent as quickly as we originally anticipated. That's decreased by $1.8 million. So altogether, our deficit that we're budgeting is $10.9 million. which on the slide, as you can see, is approximately $800,000 less than the budget that we presented in 21-22. On the next slide, Jake, this summarizes the operating deficits service. So water, budgeting a deficit of 4.2 million, wastewater 2.3 million, and stormwater 4.4 million. One of the items that I was going to flag in item 4.1 is our forecast currently is to have an operating deficit of for the fiscal year of just about 4.5 million. So we are in a substantially better position than we thought we were going to be when we produced the budget last year. So I just wanted to provide that update as we go through the process. On the next slide, Jake. So this is one of the parts of the motion is to approve the sponsorship. So there's a specific reference to this in the motion, and this is the where we provide sponsorship money. So the total amount, $33.1 million, $33.1 thousand. Here's the summary by where those sponsorships go. And that's my operating budget report.
Thank you very much. And now we will open the floor to some. Does anyone have any questions to Louis before we go further?
Before we move to questions, I just wanted to make one comment, partially to address Patty Cuddle's questions about cost containment. And also I want to thank Louis and his team, all of our team, for the work they've done on the budget, because it's been a long process. When we started, we were at a combined deficit of $14 million. As Louis mentioned, we brought that, we improved that number significantly. And one of the key objectives of the cost containment program, the Halifax Water Board's approved several years ago, was to keep growth in our operating expenses in line with CPI. And I'm very pleased that, you know, when you look at this budget that Louis presented, the growth in operating expenses is 2.7%, which is well beneath Halifax CPI, which right now is running at 3.86%. And a number of our items like electricity and chemical costs don't inflate at the same rate as CPI. It's actually at a much higher rate. So to get us to the budget we've got today, it has taken a lot of effort. And finally, from the cost containment perspective, the program works that any cost saving opportunities of $5,000 or more, or 2% of total capital projects, must be reported, and we have staff fill out forms and then they get reported to the board. Thanks.
Thank you, Kathy. Okay, we'll open the floor now to questions. And I see Commissioner Cuddle just clarifying that you have a question at this stage, or was that from the last one?
That was from the last one.
Okay, good. Thanks. I was trying to do the math on the timing. Okay, Commissioner Rawlings.
Thank you. I did think Commissioner Cuddle was ahead of me. Just two questions for Louis on the report. So page 90 of the board package, or page 9 of your report, it refers to that we want to maintain a minimum of 3% of total expenditures in the surplus fund. Is there any way to tell me what the 18 million you're showing, where that lies within the 3%?
18.3 million is approximately 11%.
Thank
so
you.
it is higher than in total. But when you look at the details that are provided on page 9, you can see that most of that accumulated surplus is in the water side. It's at the bottom part of the page. So about of the 18.3 million, 16.6 is on the water side. So we're probably a little bit heavy on the accumulated surpluses on the water side currently. But if you keep going to the end, one of the biggest challenges is the accumulated deficit that we expect on the wastewater side. So that's approximately $4.5 million. So that's clearly the wrong direction in terms of where those surpluses should be.
Oh, and look, I didn't read the top of the page. It told me 11%. Sorry, Louis. And thanks for pulling that up, Jake. If you can just go to the next page, page 10 there. I think there's just an error there, the 12.2 million.
Yes, there is.
Yes,
It should be.
okay.
Sorry.
If you can just correct that.
Yep.
That was all I had, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just looking in our chat, just want to thank you, Commissioner Daigle-Gammon, for the note on the presentation. I just want to confirm to all commissioners that the presentations will be uploaded to our intelligent platform following this. Thank you, Heidi. And looking for any further questions on this. And if not, perhaps someone can put a motion on the floor. Can we see the motion in the, there we go. So that's 4.3.
Sure, Rawlings can make that motion.
Thank you.
I move that the Halifax Water Board approve the attached proposed 2022-23 operating budget, inclusive of the proposed 2022-23 budget for unregulated activities. It is recommended the board approve the list of 2022-23 sponsorships totaling $33,100.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Commissioner Cuttle is second. Any questions or comments on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. And the motion is carried. Thank you. We'll now move to 5.2, Acreley Reservoir Rehabilitation Project.
Okay. Madam Chair, I don't have a presentation. You have a detailed report. I think everything you need to consider is in the report, but there is some uniqueness to how we're managing risk and funding it that I was prepared to talk to for 3 or 4 minutes. So we can skip right to questions if you'd like, or I could chat for a few minutes on that.
Okay, well, let's test the waters on questions, and then if we find that that seems to be leading back to that areas of concern, then we'll ask for you to. Any questions on this?
Yeah, I had a question.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Read question about the contingency, which is reserved for the budget. So if I'm not mistaken, in the board package, the contingency calls for 10% for project contingency, $770,000. I
Yes.
can't recall the page number on the board package. I can try to look it up quickly. And the on the previous page, the contingency numbers are quite different. Is there any gap in contingency, or has anything been changed between the consulting report until the requested budget?
Yeah, I would have to. Are you talking about the? Okay, I'm just. What's changed there is in the consultant budget, that is what the consultant put in as what they feel is appropriate. The 10% that we're using is a policy that we have based on the level of risk that we think is in place, depending on the level of design when we're bringing this to you. So the consultant is putting in a contingency which would relate more to the contingency that would be carried in the construction contract, but we're asking for the 10%, which is a policy that we would have in bringing projects to the board related to where they are in the development stage.
Any further questions, Commissioner?
No, thanks.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any in the chat. Last call. Perhaps someone can put the motion on the floor then. There we go.
I can do that, Madam Chair. I was just looking for my unmute button.
Thank you, Commissioner Daigle-Gammon.
I move that the Halifax Water Board approve the Acreley Reservoir Rehabilitation Project at a total cost of $8,840,000.
Thank you. I need a seconder.
Sure, Rawlings can second.
Thank you. Any questions or comments on the debate on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. The motion's carried. Okay, we've already done item number 6, so we're now moving on to item number 7, the 2022-23 Cost of Service Manual and Rate Application, Water, Wastewater, and Stormwater Services.
Well, I'll be walking through the presentation. So the first slide, this is just the recommendation that was put in your package, so we'll skip through that. What I wanted to do is talk a little bit about how rates are prepared at Halifax Water and the processes that we go through. And then I'll walk through some of the details around what we're proposing in terms of our framework for the application. As a starting point, we are required to have rates that cover our operating and capital budgets. So those two have just been approved for the current fiscal year. So our job now is to go back and develop a rate structure that provides the revenue we need to support those budgets. So what we do is we go through quite a detailed process. We take a cost of service manual, which I'll walk through in a little more detail, to the UARB, and they're required to approve that. We also prepare an application that goes before the UARB, and they are the decision maker as it relates to the rates that customers are charged. So the cost of service manual is really the methodology that we use to allocate costs to customers, and then that becomes the basis that we use to then generate the rates. So that methodology is based on sort of the North American principles from the American Wastewater Association and the Water Environmental Federation. Halifax Water has been working through this methodology with the UARB for approximately 10 years. So it's a well-established process that we use at Halifax Water. So we can go to the next slide, Jay. So the cost of service manual is based on the principle of cost causality. So the extent that a customer causes Halifax Water to incur costs, the principle is that we will allocate those costs to that particular customer or customer class, and then we will recover revenue based on the rates sufficient to pay for those costs. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So the next couple of slides are really talking about the cost of service manual. The manual itself is approximately 130 pages of fairly technical information that describes the framework, the goals, and the mechanics that we go through to develop our rate structures. So as I said before, the framework has been well established for the last 10 years. Our process is we look at the costs of the organization, we allocate them into the particular cost factors, so the types of businesses that are those costs relate to, so whether or not it's water treatment, water distribution, wastewater treatment. So we look at our costs and allocate it to those factors. And then we go through a process of looking at where the different customers and the customer classes to determine how they impact those costs. So we will look at things like the peaking factors, the demand for water or wastewater services at particular points in time. We'll look at the strength of the effluent that are discharged by customers, and then we allocate the costs over to those different customer classes. And then we also look at the indirect costs, so those would be costs associated with primarily my group, the finance, accounting, procurement, and we'll allocate those across the customer classes, usually in the same proportion as the direct costs that are particularly attributed to those customers. So if you can go to the next slide. So the next couple of slides are sort of walk through how that works for the particular services. So this picture is just captures what I said. So on the left-hand side, the cost allocation process. looking at how we allocate the cost, the system functions. These are the yellow boxes in the middle. We look at the costs that are specifically related to customers and allocate those to their customer class. Costs that are related across the organization to all services. We choose, there's a different cost allocation method. And again, those are allocated out to our customers. So this process then drives our rate design. So if you can go to the next slide. So the next couple of slides talk about how the rates that we charge to customers relate to the types of services or the cost that the customers are causing Halifax Water to incur. So what we have is a combination of fees and service charges. We have costs that are, or charges that are fixed, and we have costs that are based primarily on consumption. And then on the stormwater side, we have costs based on, or rates based on the impervious area. So specifically a cost per transaction, we look for if a specific customer is causing us to incur costs. So a new customer looking for a new meter, we would have an installation charge specifically to that customer. So we have fees that are directly related to a particular service. We also look at services and charges like our public fire protection to provide the fire protection services. We incur certain costs, and there are calculations that are quite extensive to determine how we allocate those costs. Those costs, because of they're related to the public good, are charged to HRM, and HRM would recover those costs through the tax rate. We would have a fixed portion that we charge to customers. So Kathy referenced earlier that our consumption is decreased by approximately 25% over the last 20 odd years. So to compensate for that variability, what we have done is we have a level of fixed charges, and then the other charges that we have are based on the consumption. So the more water you consume, the more wastewater you discharge. We have consumption charges that are specifically tied to. So one of the things that we have, as we go through, when we talk about consumption in the customer portal, the more information a customer has, the more able they are to adjust this part of their rates. You can go to the next slide. So I'll skip through these next couple of slides, but really these are tying the same way the various services that are provided and the types of rates that we would use to charge water. And then the next slide, Jake, is on the wastewater side. And then the third slide is on stormwater. If you can go to the next slide. So the cost of service manual, as I mentioned, about 130 pages. To the extent that there are significant changes, we are at times required to do a cost of service manual review hearing, so a specific hearing related to that. We did anticipate that we would have such a hearing in June of this year, with a filing around the end of February. When we went through our consumption, we thought that the AMI meters that we'd install would provide additional information that we could use to redesign our rate structures. But with COVID-19, there is a slide on how consumption's changed. It has really affected our ability to use the consumption data to provide a new rate design. So traditionally, we would have had fairly stable consumption over the last couple of years. You can see in the middle parts, consumption for commercial in 2021 went down 17%. So those sort of fluctuations were affected our ability to use the data to change rates. So what we've proposed to do is to monitor that data until it becomes what I would describe as, if there is such a thing, a new normal. Once we have that information over the next couple of years, we'll look to redesigning our rate structures in the next rate application. If you can go to the next slide. So as a result, we ended up with, without a significant redesign of our rate structures, we had cost of service changes that were more routine in nature. So we reached out to the UARB, proposed that instead of filing a cost of service manual hearing, that we change gears and have a rate application hearing. The UARB has, I believe, considered that. They have indicated that if we were to file a rate application by the end of February, before the end of February, we'll be able to have a hearing in June. And what that would do is potentially give us new rates effective in the current fiscal year. And as we talked about on the operating budget, we're budgeting a deficit of $10.9 million. So that to the extent that new rates can come into effect in the current fiscal year, well, that would help offset our current deficit. If you go to the next slide, please. So I'll skip over a little bit of the starting point, but what I wanted to reference is in February 2020, we had prepared a rate application that called for rate increases of about 5.8% in 2021 and 21-22, and again in 21-22 for residential customers, and we use what we define as an average residential customer. We also had proposed increases to our commercial or non-residential customers, increases in the private and public fire protection, and had proposed to increase new fees. As a result of COVID-19, we did substantially change our application. We ended up filing an application with no rate increases for water and wastewater for 2021, and then an increase in the discharge rate only on the water side in 21-22. We went ahead with the private and public fire protection increases, but also as part of that, we put certain measures in place to reduce the impact of on customers. We did not do any collection in the sort of April to the September timeframe, and any new fees that we were proposing, we deferred those to April 1, 2021. So the next slide, Jake. So Commissioner Collins raised the issue of our surpluses. As I mentioned, we did have surpluses in when we started the process, and those surpluses allowed us to be more flexible in our approach on how we provided the rate increases we proposed. We also did go through and reduce our costs related to training. Travel obviously slowed right down or stopped for the most part during the pandemic. So we saw savings around our fleet operating costs. So we presented that information as well as part of our rate application to the UARB. If you can go to the next slide, please. So this is our highlight on our surpluses, our accumulated surpluses. If you look from the beginning, 38,454,000 on the total side to the projected surplus deficit for 22-23 of 18.3 million, we have decreased our accumulated surpluses over this time frame by 52%. So we have removed much of the flexibility that we would have had in the past to manage rate increases. We've removed that over the last couple of years. If you go to the next slide, please. So as I mentioned, accumulated surpluses have decreased. Reid has presented the capital budget of $106 million. We've gone through the operating budget. We've also looked at what the 23-24 operating budget would look like And if we applied the similar assumptions as we did for 22-23, we see that there will be fairly significant deficits again in 23-24. So what I wanted to do is just in terms of what our revenues would need to do to offset the deficits of $10.9 million, which I just presented in the operating budget, the water revenues would have to increase by 7.2%. Wastewater would have to increase by 2.7%. Stormwater, as we talked about with the $4.4 million deficit, would have to increase 44%. And that would be to bring our operating, or to eliminate our operating deficit in 22-23. As we roll forward to 23-24, what we see is that there will be continue to see deficits, and water revenues would have to increase a further 14%, wastewater a further 11%, and stormwater a further 13%. So fairly significant increases would be required to bring the organization back to break even. If you can go to the next slide. So as we develop our rates, the UARB over, as we've done this in the past, has given us guidance in terms of how to present, or how they'd like to see us present rate increases. So they're looking for us to present rates that are smoothed, that eliminate that large jump in any one fiscal year. We look at how sort of the impact of the different costs, and to the extent that we can smooth them over time. We do look at how the impact on any rate increases or the total water, stormwater, wastewater costs are relative to household incomes in the city. So we do a number of considerations, or another number of reviews in terms of how it would affect our customers. And the board, Halifax Water Board, if you can go to the next slide, the Halifax Water Board has given us guidance that they're looking for rate increases that are smooth and stay within, or a single-digit increase. So as we go through the process, we'll reference what that looks like as we go forward. So on the rate application side, so after we've gone through the cost of service manual, the rate application process requires us to put together what is called rate studies. So this is the detailed cost allocations. We talked about the cost of service manual. In total, it represents about, the application is about 50 pages. A big chunk of that is really detailed worksheets that show the allocations of the costs we've talked about. We will submit all the details to the UARB. And as I mentioned earlier, there is a very formal process that we would go through that leads to the UARB approving any rate increases. What we're looking for from the Halifax Water Board is we're looking for approval of the framework that we will use to produce the rate application. So that's what we're trying to work through today with the motion that's there in front of you. If you can go to the next slide. So in the motion, we talk about or propose rate increases in that relative to the average annual residential bill. So the next slide shows what that looks like. But what that represents, a 9% increase, which we've described as the maximum, would represent an increase to that average customer of about $76.59 or $6.38. What we've proposed is to increase fees only on the consumption side. So again, that gives a customer flexibility, or the ability, if possible, to to manage their consumption and impact their bill. If we apply some of these increases to the fixed component of the bill, the customer has no ability to affect their bill. We've also proposed that the stormwater charges would go up no more than 20% in any fiscal year. So that a 20% increase to that average residential customer would represent about $5.40 a year, or about 45 cents a month. We have also outlined increases for public and fire and private fire protection, which would not exceed 9%. And then I just wanted to make sure that it was clear is what the 9% is. The 9% would be a rate increase that we hope, based on the URB approval, that would come into effect on September 1st, 2022. And then in April 1st, 2023, it would be a further increase of another 9%. Or in the stormwater case, a further increase to a maximum of a further 20%. So as I went through the operating budget, and then in the previous slide, I spoke to the revenue requirements. This highlights the fact that we have pressures in this fiscal year with the deficit, and then as we look forward to 23-24, those pressures continue, and we will require to increase rates again in 23-24. If you can go to the next slide. So this is a snapshot of what that average residential bill looks like. So water, wastewater, you can see the base charge is our fixed charge. So this customer would pay $156 a year. The consumption charges, which are directly tied to their consumption, we use an average consumption of about 164 cubic meters, or 164,000 liters over the course of a year. That's $160 to that average residential customer. We go through for wastewater and stormwater. So you see the total average residential customer bill for all three services is about $851. If we increase that to the maximum that we're presenting here in September, that would go up by $76.59. And then a further increase April 1st of another $83.49, which would take that average residential bill to approximately $1,000 a year. If you go to the next slide, please. So I mentioned the board has approved a rate smoothing strategy. I mentioned that we look at the percentage of costs related to medium household income. We do benchmark, and the next slide shows how our rates in 2021 compared to costs across the country. And we do have what is called the H2O program, the Help to Others program, managed by the Salvation Army, that supports customers who are having difficulty paying their bills. So the next slide is just the how we compare. So you see the across Canada, these are 2021 numbers. We don't have updated information yet, but we'll prepare that again when we go with our rate application. But you can see Halifax Water benchmarks fairly well across the country. You can go to the next slide, please. So recognizing the impact that this has, we have proposed a couple of other changes to our rules and regulations, and in terms of our process, our rules and regulations call for us to charge 19.56% on overdue accounts annually. So the plan is to present to the URB that rate should decrease to 14%, so a 5.56% decrease in that rate. We also have in our rules and regulations the ability to charge a per visit fee to customers who have overdue accounts. So if we are required to deliver overdue notices to customers, we have a fee that we are able to charge in our rules and regulations. So we have historically charged that fee to customers. While we're proposing as a result of this application is to not charge it for residential customers for their first visit. And then as we go forward into September of 2022 to discontinue the per visit charge to any residential customer. So part of the application is we'll be developing what the full cost of these proposals will be, and that will be presented in the rate application. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Louis. Seeing any, oh, there we go. Commissioner, oh, it's fast and furious. Commissioner Cuttle.
There we go. Thank you. Yeah, I thank you, Louis, for the good presentation there and for this report. You know, I think, you know, for us, it's like critically important. We're setting rates. This is going to have an impact when people hear that rates are increasing on their water bills. I want to say that I'm really glad to see that we're stopping the per visit fee charged to customers who aren't able to pay their bills, and recognizing that it actually makes it more difficult for them to pay their bills. I think that is, you know, that's good kind of social policy. So I have a few questions here, and one was like really like looking, digging into the impact that COVID has had, right, on household consumption. And so when we see that big decrease in the ICI sector, which is charged a higher rate than residential, or no, it's the same rate across the board for ICI and res. Okay. So we see that, but essentially what we're seeing is a decrease in the ICI sector and an increase in the residential sector. And so when you look at household expenses, just the shift in behavior that COVID, in our working behaviors that COVID has brought on, in so many people staying home, you know, where they might have been flushing the toilet and washing their hands and drinking out of the tap at work, they're now all doing that in their house. And same with the kids who are going to school. So, you know, from kind of the public sector and the institutional sector and the commercial sector, there's been this downloading of costs to people in their homes. And I think that we need to keep that in mind, because it's not just the rate increase, it's the consumption increase. And it's not just Halifax Water, it's going to be property taxes, it's food, it's you know, everything across the board. And while it only looks like one little piece on our balance sheet, the cumulative effect that COVID is having on household expenses is much greater. And so I'm just wondering, like, when we set this rate, and I get that we're putting an application for a rate change instead of going for a change to the cost of service manual, and that we're looking at changing that rate over a couple of years. If consumption pattern, I mean, does this have, like, will the change, I guess for us, the change in where the consumption is coming from doesn't have an impact at all on our costs. And so we're just trying to figure out, like, you know, kind of what's going on here on a residential customer basis.
If I could just, one of the things that's, and I believe it's in the report, or one of the reports, we talked about the changes in consumption. And while we did have that change in consumption in 2021, what we're seeing in 21-22 is that consumption is returning more to normal patterns. So as much as it increased on the residential side in 2021, what we're seeing is a significant decrease in the residential consumption in 21-22. So we're starting to see that rebalancing of where the water consumption is coming from.
Okay, and when we look at the impact on the households, I'm just wondering what base year did we use to calculate those impacts? Was it 2021 or was it 2020?
So what we used is the current bill, so the current average residential bill. And then what we did is we sort of allocated the increases to the maximum for a rate increase in September, and then a further increase in April.
Okay, thank you.
Kathy, I think you wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, I did want to mention that we do have a lot of opportunities to help customers manage the impact on their bills, because currently only 30% of our customers have enrolled for the customer portal. So through continued promotion of the customer portal and getting people looking at their own consumption patterns and being aware of it, that will help. The act of increasing the rates will also help, because that sends an economic pricing signal, because water's been priced cheaply in Halifax for a long, long time. People don't really think about it all that much. And there are opportunities, because the per capita consumption for the average, Atlantic Canadian who doesn't really think about water as a precious resource compared to, say, somebody living in Las Vegas or somebody living in other areas of North America, we use a lot more water as a society. There are still people watering gardens and washing cars, and there's lots of low-hanging fruit if people really want to try to offset the impact on their bill. And we see one of our roles is to help provide information and encourage them to do it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Dago-Gammon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Am I muted?
Nope, you're good.
Okay, great. Thank you. So, one of the things that I worry about, so it's a 9% September and then another 9 in April. So it's still 18% within a 12-month time frame. So that is, that's a lot for some people to absorb. I see that. The other thing that when I look at, the bar graph on the comparison of other cities, this would put us above the national average, if I'm reading that correctly, or maybe when you look at a comparison, that would be 2021-22 maybe, but because it's going to put us up to 1,011 and the national average is 1,004. Louis, am I reading that correctly?
You are, and unfortunately for the information we have, it's a bit dated. So we would be comparing 23-24 rates to 2021 numbers. So the expectation is across the country, they would have had similar increases in rates. So again, we'd be benchmarking below the national average, but even if all the rates across the country stayed the same, we'd be right at about that average level.
Oh, okay. So when the title of the chart is 2021 comparison, but the data is actually data that's based on another year?
No, the $1,011 that you used in your calculation as your comparison would be the 23-24 rate.
Right.
And we would be comparing that to this slide, which is 2021 data.
Thank you.
Right. So we have a little bit of that disconnect. We're looking at future rates as it relates to past rates across the country.
So it would probably be about on par nationally then at a national average.
That's our expect. That's what we expect.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further? Commissioner Sakharov? Kathy, yeah. I think you wanted to comment more on that point before Commissioner
Rose? I wanted to comment the question by Councillor Cuddle and Councillor Dago-Gammon prompted me to remember this is the first time any of our board members have been through a general rate application with Halifax Water. So it's important to remember that your board actually does not establish the rates. What you're giving us direction on is basically the green light to start developing the application to file, like the framework. But I do want to caution you that whatever comes out of that URB process, it'll involve public hearings, it'll involve a lot of expert witnesses, a lot of interveners. I have no doubt that what comes out of it is not going to be 9 and 9. It could be something totally different. It could be less, it could be more. This is really just what assumptions do you want us to use as the starting point?
Thank you for that clarification. I think that's helpful to many of us. Commissioner Zaharov.
Thank you. Louis, question on the calculation model. So for the rate increases, you use the consumptions as the COVID times, correct?
Sorry, I'm having difficulty hearing you. Can you repeat that for me, please?
Yeah, sure. For the for your calculation method, you use the consumptions as the so-called post-COVID times, so new normal, as you called it. Is this the consumption model that you use for the rates, right?
What we used is the same assumption that we used when we did the operating budget, which is the current consumption with an increase of 1%. So what we're provided in the presentation is just that year-over-year actual consumption. What we built into our budgets for 22-23 is an increase of 1%. So it would be a little bit above what is there, because most of what we've presented here is a 0.7% increase, which is sort of what consumption is doing to the end of December. So we anticipate that consumption will continue to increase, but we've built in a 1% increase going forward.
Okay, so assuming theoretically, assuming that the COVID, will relax at some point in time and the consumption will go back to normal, you're not anticipating any significant changes to the budget from the budget perspective.
No, what we're seeing, and I think Kathy referenced it going through the business plan. This is the first time we've budgeted an increase in consumption, I think going back 20-something years. So we are starting to see that those declines over the last 20 years flatten out, and now we're seeing with the new customers coming in and the growth in the city that consumption will start to increase.
Okay, thanks. And last question, back to the previous, I think from Commissioner Deagle-Gammon about having the increase in September and then April. I'm just curious what would be the impact on the budget if the increases will be September 2022 and September 2023, if you look at this option, just to see, if it might help the public and smoothen the impact.
Again, I am having a little bit of trouble hearing the question. If we have, so right now our budgets are based on no rate increases. So to the extent that we get a rate increase in September, the expectation is that new revenue would start to come in, which will reduce our deficit of $10.9 million in the operating budget and reduce the deficit going forward into the future years. If we don't get a rate increase in 22-23, our budget deficit would stay at 10.9. So any increase in rates in the current fiscal year will reduce that deficit. Any increase in this year will reduce the deficit in the future years. If there's a further increase in April, then again, that in theory would significantly reduce the deficit in 23-24.
We do not see a scenario where we're operating with the surplus over the next several years. Would that be correct to say, Louis?
Yes, that would be very correct. And what we're seeing is, and Reid, as he talked about the IRP, there was a graph that he presents that has, you see sort of the spikes that happen. Each time there's an increase in capital spend, it will increase the debt that we require, it will increase the depreciation that we pass on to the customers. So we will see some fairly significant spikes going forward as that increase in capital budget. What we're hoping to do through the rate smoothing process is to smooth those rate increases over over time. So rather than increase, based on purely the budget and the rate models, as we smooth things, then that sort of reduces the impact in any one fiscal year to the customers.
Okay, great. Before we move on, I just want to note that we're 8 minutes past our stop time. Just want to ensure, just by a raise of hands, does anyone have any concerns around hard stops if we, at the very least, finish this item? No? Okay, good. So any further questions?
There's a note in the chat from Brad Anguish. He has a question.
Thank you.
Yes.
Brad?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'll keep the camera off just to make sure I don't lose you, and hopefully you can hear me clearly. So Louis, great presentation, thank you. I thought the residential explanations were excellent. Could you maybe comment just quickly, we've got many councillors heading into an overall tax framework discussion tomorrow. Could you just recap the increases against the various customer categories, just to kind of give a sense of who's getting increases, who isn't? And again, I'm pointing to your table where you have commercial, industrial, multi-res, residential. So when we say no more than, we're going to increase across the board on 9, we're going to hold residential less than 9% or to 9%. But what does that mean for the rest of the classes? And do you kind of have can you just lay that out for us? Because of course, a big discussion tomorrow will be business recovery. Thank you.
So most of our customers approximately are the residential side. So that tends to be our first focus. We have not gone through the detailed rate calculation for the other groups within our customer class base, Brad. So we don't have that information now, but what we will do, and as we mentioned earlier, the consumption charges change. So the plan is not to increase the fixed costs. So that is a fairly significant part of the charge to all customers. But we haven't gone through that detailed calculation of the other groups.
If I could add to that, Brad, what we expect is the end result, the slide we do to benchmark the residential customer against those 14 cities. We have done that exercise in the past, benchmarking all of our larger meter sizes against those other cities. The larger meter sizes would be where the industrial, institutional, commercial, and multi-residential would be falling. And similar to how we benchmark beneath the national average on the residential, we are benchmarking well beneath the national average on all of our other meter sizes, with the exception of the 10-inch meters, of which we only have, I think, 3 customers. So once we get into the details of the rate application, we'll know with certainty what those percentage increases look like for those other customers. But because we're only looking at increasing the volumetric rate, not the base charges, the other thing to bear in mind is those kinds of customers where they're typically consuming more water actually have a larger magnitude opportunity to also save water and become efficient and get on the customer portal and start water efficiency programs.
Thanks very much. So 2 quick follow-ups. Does residential include multi-residential in your recommendation? So they would be held to 9%, or is that separate? And then my next question is, because it's a consumption charge, could a commercial bill exceed 9%?
So the analysis that we've done is to look at that average residential customer. So if in a multi-residential, you have an average residential customer, that's what their bill is now, and the 9% is the total cost. So we will see that water, wastewater, and stormwater rates will likely individually go up more than 9%. As a whole, the goal is to keep that increase in total of 9%. So if you are a water-only customer, your increase might actually be less than 9%, just because water, with the accumulated surpluses that we have a bit more flexibility. If you're a stormwater-only customer, that stormwater-only customer will see increases based on our proposal as high as 20%. So it really, to your point, if it's a multi-residential unit, if they are consuming less than what we consider an average residential customer, their bill may be off, maybe less than the 9% that we're presented here. Sorry, Brian, and I know there was two parts. I'm not sure I answered the second part.
It's okay. Actually, I think in giving that answer, I have a better sense of my other questions. So I'm good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I just want to add for clarification that currently we do not have customer classes approved by the URB for water or wastewater. Our rates are set based on meter size. So you could have different types of customers having different types of meter sizes depending upon the type of building. And we have one single volumetric rate that applies to all customers. The customer categorization and establishing rates for residential, commercial, multi-residential, institutional, industrial is something that is for future consideration once we get normalized, consumption after COVID-19. But because right now we don't have those customer classes, all customers are treated equally based on their meter size.
Thank you, Kathy.
Any further questions? I would just like to offer, do I have to? I don't have to, because there's no motion on the floor to step down from the chair. I can just ask a question. So I really appreciate, and I'm sure everyone here, I think we're all on the same page, that during COVID and over the past 2 years, there's a lot of residents who are, I think, obviously going to be more concerned than some others. And the social policy, as Commissioner Cuttle termed it, is around the overdue accounts and the interest and all those. I think those are all great. And I appreciate seeing them. I've often spoke in other conversations, particularly at council, around the potential for what we're seeing now in vulnerability for residents to meet the capacities of their financial burdens is a bit of the tip of the iceberg. We're still in a pandemic. We're still experiencing what the effects of the economic changes are on people. As we know, transportation, fuel, cost of food, all those things are still ever changing. And so it brings me to our H2O program. And I'm just wondering, did you give any consideration to beefing that program up? Because I think over the last 2 years, I'm just curious as to what has been the uptake on that. And I have known of other years where really the financial capacity of that program can run out. And if we're still seeing, and maybe I'm wrong about that, but if I fear that we're just beginning to see the effects of how burdened people are on paying their bills, and should we be looking at that as well?
I didn't go back and see what usage has been over the last couple of years. It's certainly something we could pull together and provide to the, Kathy just raised her hand.
I think we can bring you a report at the March or June board meeting with the current information, but the program had only run out of funds and been fully exhausted, I'd say 1 year within the last 10 years. I think it was maybe around 2015. We did make changes to the program in 2017. The current utilization, I think, is budgeted to be about $40,000. The theoretical budget for the program is $75,000. So we do have room within that program. and can look at how we can promote utilization of that program too. But that program is one that has not been fully subscribed in the last few years.
Okay, and another question I have is part of your rate plan that goes to the UARB, does that include something around communications, around public, how this would be conveyed and what your plan would be on communication?
I believe we have Jeff Myrick on the line. We do have a communications plan developed to go with the rate application. Jeff, if you're here, do you want to speak to that?
I certainly can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So yeah, we're developing a comprehensive communications plan for the rate application. One of the key parts of that, of course, is being empathetic to the reality that there's an impact on some customers that are more sensitive to it. We are in the process right now of developing different touch points, including engagement with affordability groups, and also with messaging layers in that the notion that there are changes to how we alleviate some of the pressures on those who are less fortunate or can't afford to pay their bills, and also talk about the H2O program. So that'll all be layered in there. We're pretty close to a final plan. The key thing now will be definitive numbers as part of the application, so that we can get it all tied up and ready to go.
Would it include as well, Jeff, the business piece that shows that, for instance, that information around Halifax comparing to other provinces and such, that I think those are important pieces for the public to have. In some cases, it won't matter. I think there's a certain layer that will just be against it, but I think it's going to be really helpful to really share the rationale and the pieces of the story that lead to this, including some of the past mitigations around, particularly through the pandemic, of what measures were taken to help residents and things like that. So I just throw that out there for consideration on making sure that the entire piece is covered on educating the public on why this might be happening. Ultimately, we won't know to what degree until the UARB makes a decision. But that's another piece to say out loud. This is it's not a done deal, because often when the public hear about this conversation, it's going to be we're raising the rates. Well, we need to be upfront about every step of every process.
No, I totally agree, and we will be using or telling a story, and it will be about the notion of where we are faced with pressures and have to fulfill our policy or regulatory obligations, but also telling a story from a point of view of where we are right now in terms of rates and how we've continued to provide value for our customers at the same time as managing the costs of being in a fast-growing city with aging infrastructure and environmental compliance that need to be met.
Yeah, and if I can just add one more piece to that, which you touched on it, which is a growing city. We have a lot of pressure in the city right now from all levels of government who have a role in it around building residential properties, and that obviously that'll affect consumption, but it'll also create pressures on Halifax Water for infrastructure. So that's a really important piece to get convey well in a way that is about addressing the challenges for families around housing. It's an important for Halifax Water to take a a significant role in supporting the efforts to face the housing crisis, but it also creates pressures to accommodate and everyone and serve everyone. So something to think about. Okay, last call for, I'm finished with that. Anyone else? Commissioner Cuttle.
Thank you. Yeah, I think so part of the story also has to be around, conversation we're having earlier around our capital budget versus our operating budget and where this rate increase fits in, right? Because, part of it, when we talk about a growing city, are we expecting current customers to pay for infrastructure improvements for future customers, right? And how does that all tie in with how we manage debt, how we look at our infrastructure, our capital costs versus our operating costs? In some ways, we need to pick this apart, not only for the public to understand, but for us to kind of figure out in our decision making, like, what is driving these rate increases? Well, what's the burden we're putting on customers today for customers tomorrow? It's like, what's the benefit of a growing city if it all does is like increase all our costs? It's like, I think that strategically, and I know that this team has a very strong strategic plan about how to manage everything, and has put a lot of considerations into how we kind of keep costs low. But I think that needs to be part of the story as well. The people need to understand those two things. I think I even need to understand them better.
Great, thank you, Patty. Okay, we will need someone to put a motion on the floor, possibly. Commissioner Rawlings, are you trying to gear up for that? I'm not sure. I can't tell.
I can do that.
Okay,
I
thank you.
didn't want to make sure I hogged it. Commissioner Rawlings,
Sorry, excuse me, Madam Chair and
make
Commissioner
the
Rawlings.
motion.
Sorry, I apologize. Just before you jump into that, Commissioner Rawlings, just based on the discussion that had occurred today, just to ensure that everyone has the clarity that they need, I'm going to suggest that the words "per year" be added to the ends of number 3, 5, and 6, just to ensure the clarity of the motion. It's ultimately your motion, but that's my suggestion.
I will take that advice. Commissioner Rawlings moves that the Halifax Water Board approve the filing of an application to the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board requesting approval for 1, an increase to rates for water, wastewater, and stormwater service effective September 1st, 2022, as described in the report dated January 21st, 2022. Number 2, the updated cost of service manual and Halifax Water regulations. It is further recommended that the Halifax Water Board approve development of the application based on the following parameters. 3, increase in the average annual residential bill for water, wastewater, and stormwater services not to exceed 9% annually. Number 4, any increase to water and wastewater rates to apply only to consumption and discharge rates respectively. 5, any increase to public and private fire protection charges not to exceed 9% annually. 6, any increase to stormwater charges not to exceed 20% annually. And number 7, any increases to take effect over 2 fiscal years becoming effective September 1st, 2022 and April 1st, 2023. I so move.
You have a second?
I'll second that.
Commissioner Cuttle, a second. And is there any debate or questions? I have a question. Will the board see, before it actually is submitted, what's the plan for board review when you really land on what's going forward?
So one thing that we had discussed was the possibility of putting a meeting in the calendar. It wouldn't have to be a long meeting, at least an hour though, sometime in February, that we could give you a preview of the application before it gets submitted on the 24th. That way you would have the key messages, you would know more about the communication strategy and which groups we've met directly with to do some stakeholder engagement.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, that's my question. Not seeing any further. Is there a call for the question on this one? All in favor say aye.
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 Those against, nay. And the motion is carried. Thank you for the tremendous amount of work that has been done and will come. So it's been suggested, which I would agree, that we should look at deferring item number 8, number 9, and number 10 to our March meeting. Is there consensus on that? Does anyone have any opposition to that? No, seeing none, then do we need a motion for that or anything, Heidi?
No.
No. Okay, so at this point, I want to thank everyone for participating. Thank you for your indulgence in getting us through some really important things. For our new commissioners, we do have a lot of big things coming along. So thank you for, again, thank you for joining the team. And with that, I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Commissioner Cuddle. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.